Today we're talking about the mystery of quantum mechanics and consciousness and their solution. Because quantum mechanics and consciousness are two of the biggest areas that science cannot explain. And what we're going to see is that one of the reasons why these two areas cannot be explained by science is because they share a commonality between them. We're going to see that the problem that arises, which makes science unable to explain quantum mechanics and consciousness, deals with their materialist and empiricist dogmatic bias. That we can solve these problems actually quite easily by seeing that they actually relate to each other. Now, some scientists are beginning to think that, hey, maybe this is a possibility, and they have this idea of something called quantum consciousness. So we're going to take a look at that and see if that's true or if it's not true. And ultimately, we're going to see that even though physics is starting to get closer, some are even starting to adopt the panpsychist idea, they're still pretty far from the mark. So we're going to explain all the problems with quantum mechanics and as well get into the problems with consciousness and how to solve them. And this is extremely important if you're well versed in quantum mechanics or you've never heard of quantum mechanics before. And if you've never heard of quantum mechanics before, please watch this video and do some research on quantum mechanics in general. I did a poll on my social media if people have heard or know what quantum mechanics is. 60% said yes and 40% said no. And that's just crazy to me that 40% just don't know what quantum mechanics is. This is incredibly important. Quantum mechanics is almost, is it over 100 years? It's either over 100 years or almost 100 years old at this point, close to a century, and it obliterates the idea that we live in a material world. So if you haven't heard of quantum mechanics, please do some research, watch this video. We're going to get into it, and we're going to look at the solutions to quantum mechanics and consciousness. It's going to be good. Let's get started. So let's jump right into this article, and then I will explain what's going on as we go along. Now, this article is from mindmatters.ai, very cool website. It says, can quantum physics, neuroscience merge as quantum consciousness? And this is going to be very important because, as we said, quantum mechanics and consciousness are two areas that science cannot explain. And we're going to see the reason why they can't explain these two areas is because they have a commonality between them. And this commonality cannot be solved by the materialist paradigm. That is the paradigm, the position taken by the vast majority of science, which says that this world is physical / material and that only. And we're going to see that this is at the heart of why quantum physics and consciousness cannot be solved. So let's just go continue here. So physicist and astronomer Marcelo Gleiser offers some thoughts as to the light that quantum mechanics, as opposed to classical physics, can shed on consciousness. The problem, he thinks, is that both quantum mechanics and consciousness are mysteries. Adding two mysteries together doesn't produce simple answers. Well, I mean, that's true, but we're going to look at the foundation of these and discover that they aren't actually mysterious at all. They're only mysterious because you're operating inside a paradigm that does not include the answer to your mystery. So it's going to seem mysterious. What we're going to find out is that ultimately the answer to quantum mechanics and consciousness rely on the ontology of mind. That is, mind being real, not derivative of matter. So if you are in a materialist paradigm that says mind is not real and is a derivative of matter, consciousness and quantum mechanics are going to seem like a mystery because the answer to your mystery lies outside of your paradigm. You can imagine the paradigm is sort of being a circle. You're here inside your circle. The answer to something is outside of your circle. You'll never be able to get the answer because it is outside the walls, the dogmatic prison that you have built for yourself. So this is a quote. It says, "The truth is that despite the tremendous success of quantum physics when it comes to its applications, the digital and nuclear technologies that define much of modern life, its interpretation remains uncertain, a target of heated debate among physicists. We know how to use quantum physics, but we don't know what it is telling us about the nature of reality. And another reason why that I like to take a look at these articles from, people that are mainstream thinkers, mainstream scientists, is because I say a lot of things that people think are controversial or woo-woo. So I often say that science does not know what reality is. It is only useful at being a tool to model reality, to make predictions about reality. And a useful tool is not the same thing as an explanation. Check out my video on the difference between explanation and description if you want more info on that. But in a nutshell, what that means is that if you make a map of something, that map can be very helpful for navigating, but the map doesn't explain what the thing is that it's mapping. So a map of the city will be very good at using it to navigate the city, but the map doesn't say what a city is, its makeup, its properties, its essence, its ontology. So science is the same thing. It can make useful predictions, it can model things, it's like a map, but it does not and cannot explain what things are. And people think, oh wow, that's so, people think that that's very controversial. And I like to just point out, this isn't even controversial. This is, if you start to take high level physics, not even high level physics, if you take physics, they will teach you this. And this is a quote right here by Marcelo Gleiser saying this, that we've had tremendous success with quantum physics when it comes to its applications, how it is used in digital and nuclear technologies, but what it is uncertain. We don't know what it's telling us about the nature of reality. So first of all, right off the bat, keep that in mind, all right? This is not a controversial idea. This is mainstream, that science does not know what quantum physics tells us about reality, which in essence means they don't know what reality is, because quantum mechanics has to do with the foundation property, the foundational properties of matter, what matter is. So, which means science doesn't know what matter is. So it's really scientific materialism is so littered with logical holes. For example, they are materialists that claim that all reality is matter, yet they cannot define what matter is. They don't know what matter is. So they are a system that doesn't know what it is. Anyway, so keep that in mind. Always important to keep in mind that scientific materialism is not a rationalist system. That's a big misconception, because people who are atheists or follow scientism love to say, oh, reason, reason, reason. But remember, always remember, scientific materialism, the prevailing scientific establishment is not rationalist, it's empiricist. And because it's an empirical system, that means that reason is in a subordinate position, that reason is used, but only as a secondary character, kind of like the sidekick. It's not the star of the show. It's not the main tool used. The main epistemological tool of science is empiricism, which relies on the senses. Then the content gathered by sensory data, reason is then applied to that. And this leads to a huge number of logical fallacies, because sense data can be very, very wrong. So it's an empirical system, not a rationalist system. A rationalist system epistemologically says that reason is what is used to know reality, first and foremost. So if our senses tell us something that we know is not rational, we can know that our senses are somehow deceiving us, because our senses can be deceived all the time. Scientists, however, do not follow this law. So if their empirical observations conflict with reason, they will approve illogical conclusions. So they are not on the side of logic and reason, they are on the side of empiricism. Really important to remember that. And again, this is not controversial. This is not me just making things up. This is just how it is. If you take a course, let's say the philosophy of science, you will be taught this. This is not controversial. It's not well known because people don't study, but it's true and not controversial. So, okay. So Marcelo Gleiser is saying we don't know what quantum mechanics is or is telling us about reality. We can use it as a tool for technology, but we don't know what it is and we don't know what it's telling us about reality. And if you don't know what quantum mechanics is, please go take a look real quick. Very, very quickly, in a nutshell, quantum mechanics basically says when you start looking at matter very, very closely, it no longer behaves like matter. It starts to behave like waves and has all these properties that conflict with definitions of matter. Things no longer behave like classical atoms or classical particles. They start to exhibit quantum properties, which are wave-like in nature. However, it's completely unknown as to what these waves are because these waves are non-physical. The wave function that they follow is not a physical wave. So everything starts to break down when you get to the quantum mechanical level. Everything that classical physics tells you breaks down at the quantum mechanical level. Scientists have no idea what this is, what's going on, because matter no longer behaves like matter. It starts to behave like waves, and not waves of matter, waves of they don't know. And precisely the reason why they don't know is because the answer, which is mind, as we'll see, is outside of their paradigm. As we said, we showed that, I gave the example of that circle. The answer is outside of their allowed possibilities. So Gleiser is saying we don't know what quantum mechanics is. We don't know what it's telling us about reality. And it's the same thing with the mind. In a nutshell, the issue here is that tagging neuronal activity is the easy part of the task. The hard part is understanding how active neurons conspire to create the sense of who we are. That is translating bioelectrical activity and blood flow into self-awareness. And that's another big thing when it comes to the mind. Sure, scientists can measure neuronal activity. They can measure electrical impulses. They can measure bioelectrical activity and blood flow. But that says nothing about self-awareness. And it's a category error to think that it does say something about self-awareness. Just because things are correlated, just because certain brain states may correlate to certain mental states, does not mean that those brain states cause those mental states. That's a post hoc ergo propter hoc illogical fallacy, logical fallacy. And the main thing to take away from this is that essentially, just like physicists, scientists cannot explain what quantum physics is and what it says about reality, neither can they understand or explain what the mind is or what consciousness is. They can model the brain, but that is not the same thing as explaining how it is that you can have the subjective experience of what it is like to be you. The brain does not explain that. So, indeed, for example, in a recent and again, this is not controversial. You go take a philosophy of science course when I have not yet said anything that falls outside of what is known conventionally. So, indeed, for example, in a recent discussion, neuropsychologist Mark Solms and neurosurgeon Michael Egnor agreed that while neuroscientists tend to see the prefrontal cortex of the human brain as the seat of consciousness, clinical experience points to portions of the brainstem. But where does that leave us? Vertebrates of widely varying degrees of intelligence and of self-awareness have brainstems. Okay, so let me now start to dive into the answer of these things. Because we're going to start getting into... All right, so let's start here. First of all, anyone who follows my videos know that I have a big gripe with how Carolyn Gray says, are you saying that matter cannot exist without consciousness? I'll get to that in a moment. I'll get to that in a moment because I'm about to explain. This goes with what you asked. Okay, so I have a big problem with science's misuse of the word consciousness. So consciousness, when scientists say consciousness, what they usually mean is sentience. They constantly, in almost every article, use the word consciousness incorrectly when they mean sentience. Sentience is awareness. Consciousness is being aware that one is aware. It's a higher form of mind. And it is a complex form of mind that allows for self-reference and metacognition. So, for example, an animal is sentient. There is a what it is like to be a dog. The dog is hungry, the dog is happy, the dog is sad, and it has all these experiences. The dog is aware. But the dog is not conscious in that it's not aware that it is aware. There's a big difference, because when you are aware that you are aware, this develops a sense of I, which allows one to transcend the current moment and exist in possibility space. What that means by transcending the current moment is that it means you can think of possible futures. For example, thinking of possible futures means, perhaps at 12 o'clock tonight, I will have a midnight snack. Or perhaps later on, I want to go see a movie. You are thinking about future possibilities rather than just being in the current moment. You are transcending the current moment and living in a possibility space. You can also transcend the current moment by pulling the past, by pulling in memories, by consciously bringing in memories. Oh, remember that time when I, went to the supermarket and I accidentally got peas instead of grapes. I don't know why you do that, but that's something that I don't know why this is the first thing that came to my head. Kind of weird, but you see what I mean. Consciousness is a high and complex form of mind that allows one to be aware that they are aware, engage in advanced forms of metacognition that develops a sense of I, allows one to transcend the current moment, live in a space that allows for possible futures, and to be able to bring in the past, such as explicit conscious retrieval of memory. In a nutshell, 9 times out of 10, when you're reading a scientific article talking about the nature of reality or quantum mechanics or panpsychism and they say consciousness, they're using it wrong. They mean sentience. And any psychologist will tell you this. I mean, not any psychologist, but any psychologist that's worth their salt will tell you that this is the case. So, let's now start to dive into some of the answers here. Scientific materialism is a materialist paradigm. And what this means, as I said, is that they believe that all reality is material and that mind is derivative of matter. So now in Hyperianism, we have the opposite stance. It is a rationalist idealist system, which means that all reality is mind and that matter is derivative of mind. It's the complete opposite stance. Not necessarily that matter is a derivative of consciousness, but that it is a derivative of mind. Because remember, consciousness is a complex form of mind that evolves down the road. But mind itself is the underlying component that gives rise to matter. This is why once you start getting into the quantum mechanical territory and you start looking very closely at material particles, they no longer start to behave like material particles. Rather, they start exhibiting wave-like behavior that is not material. Why? This is because matter in our system is founded on mind. So this wave-like behavior is mind. Once we start bringing mind into the picture, the mysteries of quantum mechanics are no longer mysterious. These mysteries of quantum mechanics and consciousness and mind are only mysterious if you take a materialist position. Because now the answer is no longer outside of our paradigm, it's perfectly within our paradigm. We have broken down the imprisoning dogmatic walls with reason, which allows for us to find the answer to our question. Now, if you're new to my channel, you're wondering like, well, how do we know that reality is mind? We show rationally and mathematically how we can know this. Well, I'm going to, this video would be hours long if I got into that now, because we want to talk about quantum mechanics specifically. But just know that in our system, reality is founded on mind. And if you want to know why, like what is the reason for this, how do we know this, check out my other videos. I've done tons of videos on this. But this is where Hyperianism begins. That reality is ultimately mind. And we define mind through mathematics, rigorous mathematics, beginning with the source formula and the principle of sufficient reason. And so in essence, what this means is we know what is mind. Mind is basically living mathematics, mathematics as frequency in motion. It's still a structure of mental relationships. And by mental, we mean it doesn't have any sort of physical extension. And ultimately, matter is derived from mind, meaning that matter is a kind of illusion and ultimately breaks down to mind, which is why in quantum mechanics, when we start looking very, very closely at material particles, we see that they are no longer material and they begin to exhibit wave-like properties, which is mental properties, properties of mind. And how does this happen? This happens via a Fourier transform. If anyone is familiar with Fourier mathematics, mind is defined as frequency functions. We can transform frequency functions into space-time functions, functions of space and time, which in a nutshell means that we can take pure mind, pure frequencies, and by adding these thoughts together and complexifying them, we can give rise to space-time extension and matter. And you can see this in the Fourier transform. This has to do with the property of phase and orthogonality. If you start bringing phase into the picture, if you have a function that has no phase and all constituent waveforms are completely equal in amplitude and all this, you get a delta function in space and time, which is a singularity which has no extent. There is no space and time. But if you start adding variation and phase into the mix, then you start getting extension, which means space and time starts arising. So space and time, physicality, matter, depends on mind, which is frequency, and how this occurs is by introducing phase relationships into these frequency of mind, which gives rise to extension. And you do this every time you go to sleep and dream at night. When you go to sleep and dream, you create an entire, it depends how you define extension, but you inhabit a dream world that you can enter into that seems from within that world to have extension. But ultimately, extension is a kind of illusion, and the extension ultimately depends on the phase relations of mind. So, let's see, what was I explaining? Oh yeah, so when you start getting into the quantum mechanical details of things, you start seeing that matter is not material at all. It behaves like waves. Waves of what? Scientists don't know, but we know that it is mind. And the reason why it's a big mystery for science is because they exist within a materialist dogmatic paradigm for dogmatic reasons, not for rationalist reasons, just because they are accustomed to it. And that is what the established scientific community agrees their consensus is, this certain stance, very dogmatic. It doesn't matter if you are wearing church robes or a lab coat. I don't care if you're being religiously dogmatic. You're being dogmatic. It doesn't matter if it's empirically and sensory dogmatic or faith-based dogmatism. It's dogmatism nonetheless. It's not rational. So, and this is not, by the way, anything that the founders of quantum mechanics would have found to be controversial or that they would disagree with. The founders of quantum mechanics agreed. with the essence of our stance. And they don't teach you that when you go take a class in quantum mechanics. Max Planck, the founder of quantum mechanics, said that as a man who has, founder of quantum mechanics, Max Planck said, as a man who has devoted himself to the research of atoms, I can tell you about atoms this much. There is no such thing as matter. There is no such thing as matter. So he's founder of quantum mechanics is saying, someone who has devoted my whole life to the study of matter, I can tell you this. There is no matter. Matter does not exist. And additionally, he said that mind is the matrix of all matter. That essentially mind is primary. There's no such thing as matter, but there is mind, which is the controlling or foundational aspect of what gives rise to the illusion of matter. Schrödinger, Erwin Schrödinger, famous for the Schrödinger equation, which is at the very heart of quantum mechanics. That's one of the very first things that you learn if you take a course in quantum mechanics, is a Schrödinger equation. Schrödinger believed that reality was similar to a dream. And he was very much against the prevailing interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is the Copenhagen interpretation. And you probably heard of Schrödinger's cat. Schrödinger's cat was developed by Schrödinger to show how absurd the current attempt to understand quantum mechanics was. Schrödinger was saying, look, if you try to understand quantum mechanics like you guys are doing, you're going to get this crazy situation where cats can be both alive and dead at the same time. But guess what? If you go take a quantum mechanics course, they don't teach you that. They teach you Schrödinger's cat experiment or thought experiment as if it were true. I'm sure, and if you've even seen a documentary on quantum mechanics, they probably, give you that example of, wow, quantum mechanics is so mysterious. Schrödinger's cat can be alive and dead at the same time. Schrödinger would be turning over in his grave saying, hey, no, I developed this thought experiment to show you how dumb your ideas are. That cannot be the case, what you are saying, because you're going to have this crazy situation where cats are alive and dead at the same time. This cannot be. Yet it is taught as though it were true. Because you get these crazy ideas and crazy contradictions if you take more conventional materialist interpretation of quantum mechanics. So, we've seen Planck and Schrödinger, and then Heisenberg. Heisenberg thought that reality was ultimately mathematical mind. He said that the ideas of Pythagoras, that all reality is number, and the idea of Plato, that the domain of mind or forms is primary. Heisenberg says when you start looking into quantum mechanics, you start to see that Plato and Pythagoras were correct. That is a mathematical, formal, mental domain. So. You know what? I have a lot. We have a lot more to go. But I have to take a piss because that coffee went right through me. So I'm gonna go take a piss real quick. Then we're gonna come back because I want to concentrate on this and not think about having to relieve myself. Maybe that's why I thought of peas and grapes. Maybe I have to pee, and that translated into peas. Be right back. So basically where we left off is that, okay, we cannot explain quantum physics, scientists are saying, and we cannot explain consciousness. So what's going on here? So physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hamerhoff offer a model of consciousness from quantum mechanics. Gleiser poses it as a question. Could thoughts exist in some sort of quantum superposition in an unconscious level, only to become conscious when there is a specific selection, akin to a measurement of the electron's position? They see the protein tubulin, which forms the microtubules that make up the skeleton of neurons, as enabling the entangled quantum states, the force of a choice. So let's answer this, but I want to see, hold on, let me see how far I have to read here before I... He also tips his hat, let's see, to quantum entanglement between electrons and the neurons might mean that contact can be maintained over considerable distances because two entangled particles will act together even when separated. That said, we can be fairly certain that classical physics doesn't account for consciousness either. Gleiser suggests that their cooperation between quantum and classical physics, depending on the level, may be part of the explanation. All right, so let's take a look at this answer. So basically they're saying, hey, we can't understand quantum mechanics. We can't understand consciousness. Well, hey, maybe consciousness is kind of dependent on quantum mechanics because we have this idea of superposition, and maybe we can combine the two and get some sort of answer there. But wait a minute, there are some problems. Now look, okay, look. They're getting this all wrong. Now, they're correct in that there's some sort of commonality between quantum mechanics and consciousness, or just sentience or mind in general. Yes, there is a very important connection there, but you're not going to explain consciousness simply by saying that the brain perhaps exhibits quantum mechanical states. But they are correct in trying to use superposition as a possible explanation, but just not in the way that they're using it. So let's talk a little bit about superposition and also how this follows with understanding mind and consciousness and quantum mechanics. Okay, so what is superposition? Superposition basically says that a particle, and please keep in mind that I'm going to simplify this for sake of time and both complexity. But superposition basically says that a particle can exist in many states at once. Now, this is not entirely true. A particle is still in one quantum state, but that quantum state itself is made up of a multiplicity, sometimes even an infinity of quantum basis states. But saying it in a simplified way, quantum mechanics superposition says that a particle can be in many states at once. So what does that mean? Let's say you have electron, and you say that this electron is in a superposition of let's use location. So what this means is that they treat the electron as being, we might say, everywhere at once in all possible locations. However, when you take a measurement of that electron, and that measurement is, let's say, that electron being encountering hitting a screen or something, when you take a measurement of it. A lot of people say, oh, it's observation, but that's not really true. It's not like just looking at it makes it happen, or you're taking a measurement of it. Right? So when you take a measure of this electron, it collapses into one state. Now, it has a probability of a certain state that it will collapse into, but it will collapse into one state. Now, if any of this sounds hard to understand or crazy, it's because it is kind of crazy. This is an idea that you get when you try to take quantum mechanics from a materialist perspective. Right. So again, in a nutshell, they say, OK, you have this particle. This particle is governed by the wave function. And this says that this particle can be in a superposition of a vast multiplicity of states, let's say in position space. So a vast multiplicity of positions. But when you take a measurement, the wave function collapses into only one position. So understood simplistically, it would be saying this electron is everywhere. Okay, this electron is everywhere. However, when you take a measurement or check to see where it is, it'll only be in one place. And there's a certain probability that associated with where it will be. So let's say there's a very, very high, if there's, let's say there's 4 possible positions, or let's say three possible positions. There might be a very high probability it will be in the center position, and low probabilities it'll be on the side positions. Now, again, if this sounds kind of hard to grasp or how to understand, it's because this is an absurd idea. They're basically saying you have this particle and it's everywhere, but when you look at it, it's only one place. It's an absurd position. But and you only get this absurd result because scientists don't want to admit the ontology of mind, that mind exists. So let's see how we can easily solve this by putting mind into the equation and how this relates to mind and consciousness. And I've given this example before. So we have an electron that exists in a superposition of possible states. And it has varying possibilities of where it could be if you were to measure it. Now, if you were to say, think about a human being, I right now exist in a superposition of possible states. So basically, what am I going to do in the very next moment? There are many things that I could do in the next moment. I can continue talking to you right now. I can decide, hey, I'm going to go take a piss. I can decide that I'm going to go get some food from the refrigerator. I can decide to do jumping jacks right now. There are infinite possibilities of what I could do next. Near infinite possibilities of what I could do next. I could start doing handstands. I could, whatever. But there will be some probability that I will do one thing over the other. It is a lot more likely that I will continue here talking rather than just suddenly jumping up and doing jumping jacks. However, really, it's a deterministic process because I am going to mentally choose to do something rather than another thing because of reasons. For example, I'm going to continue talking to you right now rather than getting up and doing jumping jacks because it is important to me to get out this information, and doing jumping jacks is not going to do much except, and get my cardio exercise in or something like that. But obviously this is more important to me, so I'm going to choose to do this one. So if we want to talk sort of in quantum mechanical terms, I exist in a superposition of all possible states, but I am choosing to continue talking rather than another one because of reasons that I have. It's ultimately a deterministic process. However, for you, it would seem to be probabilistic. If you were looking at me from the outside, it would seem probabilistic because you aren't me. And so you don't know what I'm going to choose. Now, I know what I'm going to choose because I'm the one making the choice. For you, if you're looking at me, you probably think, okay, well, what's he going to do next? It's highly probable that he's going to continue talking. Now, but that might not be true because just a few minutes ago, I went up to go to the bathroom. So that is another thing. It might be low on probability. I'm not doing that every second. It's very low on but it could happen. So for you, the next action, my next state is probabilistic for you. But it's not actually probabilistic, right? It's only probabilistic because you don't have access to all the information. You're missing information. That is, you aren't me and you don't know all my subjective processes. You don't know if I have to go to the bathroom or not. So for you, it's a probability, but it's not actually a probability. It's only a probability because you are missing information. In actuality, it is a deterministic process. I have access to all the information, and I will choose one thing over another based on reasons and what takes priority, what is weighted more than the other in terms of will to power and all those sort of things. So, and now why am I talking about this? So I want you to notice that, I want you to take away a couple things from this. Notice that I exist in a superposition of many possible states. I could keep talking to you. I could do jumping jacks. I can go to the refrigerator. I can go take a nap. I am in a superposition of many states. Now note that that does not mean I'm everywhere at once. Okay? It doesn't mean that I am actually taking a nap right now. It doesn't mean that I'm actually at the fridge right now. It doesn't mean I'm actually doing jumping jacks right now. But when you look at me, I suddenly collapse down into one, probabilistically. That's not what's going on here. What's happening is that I'm in a superposition of states mentally, and I choose one over the other, and it is deterministic. So take away that I'm not actually everywhere at once. It's just mental possibilities that all exist at once. Possibilities. And also note that it is deterministic. It's not probabilistic. It's only probabilistic for you because you don't have access to all the necessary information to know deterministically what my actions will be. So let's keep that in mind. Okay? And now let's talk about particles in quantum mechanics. So particles, like electrons in quantum mechanics, again, the reason why scientists will come up with absurd interpretations, like saying that a particle will be everywhere at once and then probabilistically collapse into a certain position rather than another, is because they're denying mind. Because mind has no ontological, it has no ontology in their system, no ontological status, and they only value materialistic processes. Only materialistic processes are valid in their paradigm, in their dogmatic materialist paradigm. So what I mean by this is, if you introduce mind into quantum mechanics, you no longer get these absurd results. In other words, an electron exists in a superposition of possible states, but that doesn't mean that it's everywhere at once. What it means is that, like me, the electron has an inner mental component, and then due to its inner mathematical processes, it will choose, choose implies consciousness, but not choose, but it will follow one path rather than another and end up at one location rather than another in a deterministic way based on its inner mathematical trajectory and the different possibilities. So important to take away from this is understanding that what's actually going on at the quantum mechanical level is that the electron has an inner aspect, just like I have an inner aspect, and the electron will follow one path rather than another based on inner deterministic processes, just like I will choose to do one thing over another based on inner deterministic processes. But just like for you looking on the outside, and my processes will be seemingly probabilistic, but aren't actually, that electron will seem to behave probabilistically, but is not actually probabilistic. It is deterministic. It's just scientists deny and don't have access to all the information available, which would be the inner processes of that electron. So the absurdities of quantum mechanics are only there because they take a materialist stance. It would be like trying to explain my behavior if you denied that I had an inner aspect or an inner mind. If you deny that I have an inner aspect or an inner mind, if you deny that, suddenly my actions would seem very mysterious. You know, how is this? What is guiding? What is guiding this person's actions if they have no inner component? Now, you might try to appeal to, like deterministic physical processes, but I think you get my point in the analogy between a human being and a particle, and that if you deny the inner aspect, you're going to start to get a lot of problems. You're going to start getting a lot of difficulties. You know, if you looked at human beings, if sort of you had a bird's eye view and you were watching human beings walking around, let's say walking around a mall, it would seem very chaotic and probabilistic if you denied the fact that they had mind. It would seem like, oh, well, they seem to follow a certain path, but it's very probabilistic. Sometimes one goes this way, sometimes another one goes this way. It all seems very random. Is it actually random? No, their inner mind is guiding them. So same thing at the particle level. When you're looking at these different particles, for scientists. It seems very random, probable, based on probability and randomness, because they're denying the inner aspect. It's actually a deterministic process. Now, you can see that these absurdities, more absurdities arise because there are different interpretations of quantum mechanics. So, for example, there's one interpretation that says, well, the particle is everywhere at once. Another interpretation is the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, because they're trying to deny the mind, the inner aspect of the particle, the mental component. So one of their solutions is saying, well, that particle, instead of saying it is everywhere at once, it basically says that for every position that particle could be in, there is another universe sort of branches out and exists. So, let's break it down to three positions. If the particle can be in position A, B, or C, one interpretation of quantum mechanics will say, well, there's a universe where it's at A, and then another universe where it's at B, and then another universe where it's at C. Again, this is really absurd. That would be like if you're trying to explain my actions, but aren't allowed to appeal to my mind, you would say, well, why is this person doing one thing over another? You may say, well, maybe it's because in this universe, they're standing here, you're sitting here talking to me through the camera, but in another universe they're doing jumping jacks. In another universe they're going to the bathroom. In another universe they're going to the refrigerator. In another universe they're taking a nap. You see the absurdities that you get, and the reason why they come up with these ideas is because they don't want to acknowledge the mental component. You see the great hoops that they have to jump through, and the absurd ideas that they have to develop to try and make their materialist paradigm fit. This is extremely dogmatic and religious. This is like saying, well, if God exists, why is there evil in the world? And then, people who are theologians or religious will try and come up with all these crazy ideas of, oh man, well, that's true. Well, how is there evil in the world? Well, maybe it's because God gave us free will and they want us to and have free choice. And well, why does he send people to hell? Well, is it really free will if he sends people to hell? And they have to, constantly, it's because their paradigm is wrong. Same thing with scientific materialism. Well, how can these particles make these act this way? Well, maybe they're everywhere at once, or maybe there's infinite universes for each one. No. It's because your paradigm is wrong. It's simply and elegantly an inner aspect of the particle. So let's continue here. And one thing that I want to point out is that this position, our position of Hyperianism and ontological mathematics, is not panpsychism, it's idealism, okay? So what panpsychism says, so materialism says that all reality is matter. This is riddled with logical paradoxes. It's clearly false for anyone that has any ounce of reason. There are some scientists and neurosurgeons and some thinkers that are starting to say that, maybe materialism is wrong. Who would have thought? So, and they're moving over to panpsychism. Now, if you have materialism on one end and idealism on the other end, which is our position that reality is mind, panpsychism is kind of in the middle. And you can see it's like they don't want to let go of matter. So they're moving over to panpsychism. Not many, a few are. What panpsychism says is that reality is material. The natural world is all that there is, but matter also has a mental component to it. So basically, matter has mind. So for example, they would say that electrons have a subjectivity. In other words, there is what it is like to be an electron. Theoretically, you could be an electron, and you would be electron, making your electron choices. So it's this sort of fusion of mind and matter. Inseparable two sides of the same coin in a certain way. This is not our stance. Our stance is idealism, which says mind is primary and matter is derivative of mind. So you see, there's a big difference here. Materialism says all there is matter. Panpsychism kind of puts mind and matter on equal footing as reflections of each other or two sides, kind of a fusion. Idealism says there is only mind, matter is derivative, an illusion generated by mind. Now, panpsychism runs into a lot of problems. But one thing that I want to mention, and I want to make it clear that it's not panpsychism, because panpsychism is sort of gaining a little bit of traction, and people might go, oh, well, you're just talking about panpsychism. No. In our system, mind is primary, defined by frequency functions, and then matter arises as being transformations of that frequency functions by introducing phase and having a space and time representation of those frequency functions once you introduce phase into the mix. But what this means is that electrons, for example, in panpsychism, electrons there would be a subjective element to them. Now, in Hyperianism and ontological mathematics, that is not the case. Electrons are not a mind, but a complex of thought. And there's a very big difference. So electrons do have a mental aspect, but it doesn't mean that the electrons have a subjectivity. You couldn't, for example, incarnate as an electron. That's not what's going on here. Electrons don't have a subjectivity, like I and you have a subjectivity. There is what it is like to be me. There is not a what it is like to be an electron. However, even though electrons don't have a subjectivity associated with them, they are mind in that they are thought. And there's a difference here. So even though electrons aren't subjectivities, they can still be guided by an inner aspect of mind. Inner mathematical frequency functions, inner mathematical laws. This is because they are a thought and a structure that is guided by frequency functions. So a way to understand, this might sound really complicated, but it actually isn't. An easy way to understand this is, think of yourself. You are a subjectivity. Now, if you close your eyes and imagine an apple, that apple that you're imagining, that apple is still mind, is it not? Yes, it is. It is a thought. But does that apple have subjectivity? Is that apple suddenly its own mind that can decide to, apples can't decide, but you know what I mean. If you were thinking of, let's say, a cat or a human or something. If you were imagining a human, that human isn't suddenly going to gain its own subjectivity and make its own independent choices apart from you. It is an aspect of you. It is your thought. So same thing with an electron. An electron is a thought that is a product of all of us together. So all of reality, it arises by all of our mental processes acting together. So the difference between, say, your thought and the thought of this cup is that this thought is a collective thought. It doesn't belong to any one mind. It is a product of the collective thought, the universal thought, you might say. And so that's important to understand. This is not panpsychism. Electrons do not have subjectivities, but electrons are mind. Particles, matter. Panpsychism says that matter has subjectivity associated with it. Hyperianism does not say that. Hyperianism says that every one of us has subjectivity, and matter is a product of us in that it is our collective thoughts. So everything around us is thought that has a material representation via space-time function. So contrary to panpsychism, matter does not have a subjective element to it. Rather, matter is thought that are products of subjectivities operating as a collective. Man, I thought this was going to be a short one today. Boy, was I wrong. Let me continue here. So this is again a quote by Marcelo Gleiser, who says, whatever the resolution may be, I'm going to try and rip through this rest of this because we got to get to our secret live stream. We have more. I got to answer questions. But whatever the resolution may be, we still do not know how to avoid the arguments from the Mysterians. Mysterians are basically people who say a position that says that reality is unknowable. You can't know it. It's forever mysterious. So the nature of consciousness could be one of those unknowables that many people will find very hard to live with. I, for one, embrace it. This unknowability may well be what will rescue what is left of our humanity from the unstoppable mechanization and objectification of modern existence. Now, this is just dumb. So he's basically saying, maybe we'll never know. The Mysterians could be right. And you know what? I like that we will never know. And that because that saves us from mechanization and objectification of existence. That's stupid. First of all, you're denying the possibility of knowledge. I mean, can you really? At this point, you're definitely. I mean, this person never claimed to be a philosopher, but philosophia, lover of knowledge. You're a denier of knowledge at this point. You're not only you're not a philosopher, you're an enemy of philosophy. You're a hater of knowledge, and just because you have knowledge of existence does not objectify and mechanize existence. What objectifies and mechanizes existence is saying that reality is a mechanistic material process. What brings life and vibrancy into reality is understanding that there is both objectivity and subjectivity, and science denies the subjective component. So ultimately, reality does operate via objective rules, yes, of course, but we are all mental subjectivities. So science is what scientific materialism is, what is mechanizing reality, not knowledge. Knowledge saves us from mechanization by revealing that reality is mind and that we are all eternal living subjectivities defined by mathematics, yes, but living mathematics, not dead, dry, mechanistic abstract mathematics, but ontological living frequency energy patterns. That's what we are. And knowledge does not take us away from this. It brings us closer to it. It reveals it to us. And this is the whole point. Know thyself and you will know the universe and the gods, that classic aphorism. And this is part of it inscribed at the entrance to the oracle at the Temple of Delphi. And this idea of that reality can't be known is also absurd. So by the Mysterians, he means philosophers like Thomas Nagel, who says, and Colin McGinn, who says we are not equipped to understand the workings of consciousness. And David Chalmers argue that although we can know the conscious mind is nothing more than the brain, false, it is simply beyond the conceptual apparatus of human beings to understand how this can be the case. This is, again, how stupid. This is so, okay. So listen to the absurdity of this position. Although we know that conscious mind is nothing more than the brain, which is false. This is logically fallacious, as I've showed in many of my videos. We know that it cannot be the case that mind is the product of the brain. We know that it cannot have evolved, and we know all the logical fallacies that entail. Watch my video called "Consciousness Cannot Have Evolved," or could not have evolved. I go into detail on why it is 100% fallacious to try and say that mind is some sort of evolutionary process or epiphenomenon of the brain. So although we know that conscious mind is nothing more than the brain, that's false. And if you do, please show me how you know this. Go ahead. I'm waiting. I'd love to hear, because that's one of the great unsolved mysteries of scientific materialism. So go ahead and explain it to me if that's the case. No, scientific materialism can't, because it's outside their paradigm. So that quote is ridiculous. You don't know that. You're just dogmatically claiming it. So although we know that conscious mind is nothing more than the brain, it is simply beyond the conceptual apparatus of human beings to understand how this can be the case. This is riddled with, even just this sentence is riddled with fallacies. So first of all, although that we know the conscious mind is nothing more than the brain, big fallacy there. Because you're just dogmatically claiming it. Then going on to say, it is simply beyond the conceptual apparatus of human beings to understand how this can be the case. First of all, no, it's not beyond the conceptual apparatus of human beings to understand how this can be the case. It is beyond the capability of a dogmatic materialist paradigm to be able to account for how this can be the case, because it literally can't be the case, because it's a false position. It cannot be the case. It's not that human beings are incapable. It's that is a false case. And we can absolutely know that this is not the case by showing how it's a logical fallacy, that, for example, it cannot have evolved if it is an epiphenomenon. And if you try to claim some sort of emergent property as well, you can't just claim it. You have to show how it could be the case that it is an emergent phenomenon. And no rational mechanism can be provided by science how it could be the case. It's just, again, a dogmatic claim. So it's riddled with fallacies. We know that the brain cannot produce mind. It can't within a material. It cannot. So it's not that it's beyond the conceptual apparatus to understand how it could be. It's that it can't be. But we can know how mind can produce matter. We can know it. We can. So there is no Mysterian element to reality. We can, through Hyperianism and ontological mathematics, explain it. I have done so in many of my videos. And again, if you're thinking, well, how do we know that reality is mathematical? How do we know that it's primarily mind? I don't have time to. I would have to give an entire course right here, right now. But throughout my videos, you'll find the answer to these questions. We can absolutely know that reality is mental and mathematical and rational. And we can know how it has the capability of giving rise to matter through Fourier transforms, frequency functions being translated into space-time functions, etc., etc., etc. So, first of all, there is no Mysterian element to reality. We can know it. So, and listen to this ridiculous argument of the Mysterians. Although we know the conscious mind is nothing more than the brain. No, you don't. If so, please tell me how. Oh, you can't, so you don't know it. But then they go on to just say outright that they don't know it. It is simply beyond the conceptual apparatus of human beings to understand how that it can be the case. So again, there's multiple logical fallacies at play, and I find this hilarious. Please, please just look at how ridiculously and absurdly fallacious and unintelligent this position is. Although we know that conscious mind is nothing more than the brain, it's beyond us to understand how it's nothing more than the brain. You're telling me that you know that the mind is just the brain, but that you don't know how the mind is just the brain. Do you see? Do you? And the entire paradigm of scientific materialism, scientific empiricism, is riddled with absurdities like this. Now, again, I'm not saying that science isn't useful. It's very useful. Look at all the wonderful technology we have because of science. I'm talking to you right now because of science, great medical advances because of science. I am not denying the pragmatic usefulness of science. It's great for that. But it cannot claim to know what reality is. Pragmatic success does not entail epistemological knowledge of the ontology of reality. They can't say what reality is. They just know how to create useful objects within it. And that's great, but you have to know what a thing is. It's a category error to say that science is revealing the ontological nature of reality, because that's not what it's doing. It's just modeling reality and creating pragmatic, useful tools and technologies, which is great, but you have to know what it is. And when you start to really look at science, when they try to explain existence, it's the most inept, illogical, fallacious thing you can possibly get. It is as absurd as religion. How does reality exist? Well, God created it. How does God exist? I don't know. Just as so many people are still trapped in religion, but people are starting to wake up. And a lot of people look at religion and go, oh man, that's crazy. How can people believe that? In years' time, people are going to have the same attitude towards scientific materialism. It's going to be just as absurd. Believing in the existence of material atoms that have some sort of independent existence from mind is going to be as absurd as believing in Zeus or Jesus or Allah or whatever you want to say. It's that crazy. And you can see how absurd this is in statements like, although we know that the conscious mind is nothing more than the brain, we don't know how the conscious mind is more than the brain. We know it, but we don't know it. ridiculous. So let's continue, because we're only a few more paragraphs here. Such an answer this world is so crazy. It is astounding. It blows my mind that people take statements like this as intelligent statements. You can't get things more absurd than this. We know X, but we don't know X. Please give me my Nobel Prize and doctorate. So such an answer, it's not even an answer. It's not an answer. Such an answer raises further questions. Yeah, it does. If the conscious mind is nothing more than the brain, then we won't understand it. To understand it, we must look beneath it, and there is nothing beneath it. Oh, okay. But how do we know? I'm sorry, this is just getting more hilarious. But how do we know that? We don't, actually. Sorry, hold on. I can't keep a straight face. Hold on, just give me a moment. I can finish this. I can finish this. I can. Okay. Oh, hold on. I can do this. But how do we know that? We don't, actually. All that we know is that efforts to understand the mind as merely what the brain does have not proven useful. Okay. Oof. If we assume that the mind is not merely what the brain does, we have some reasonable hope of understanding it further. Thank you. God damn it. That's where quantum physics may shed some light. It may provide, for example, a point of intersection between mind and brain. But there's no reason to think that's a full answer. God damn, that was a hard couple paragraphs to get through. All right. So here, look, in a nutshell, why can science not explain quantum mechanics, and why can science not explain consciousness / mind and subjectivity in general? It's because the answers to both questions are that mind is primary. They cannot explain mind as subjectivity and what eventually becomes consciousness. First of all, they can't even fucking define consciousness properly. But the reason why they can't explain it is because they are assuming dogmatically that their materialist paradigm is correct and that mind is a product from the brain. The reason why they can't explain it is because what they are assuming to be true is a fallacious position. So yes, you can't explain it because your premises are false. So as soon as we eradicate the dogmatic, false, and fallacious premise that reality is material and replace it with the true premise that reality is rational, mathematical mind, then we have absolutely no problem accounting for mind, because we know that mind is primary. And check out my other videos if you want to know how this is the case and why we know this is the case. Check out my book, Ontological Mathematics, The Science of the Future. Check out Ontological Mathematics by Cody Newman. All these different books, right? All these different videos that I've made. I'm sure the Hyperian source has videos on this as well. Anyway, I digress. Oof, I'm tired after that, trying to get through those last few paragraphs. But as soon as you eradicate these faulty premises and replace it with the premise, the true premise that we can show to be true based on the principle of sufficient reason that reality is mind, you no longer have the issue of accounting for mind. What the idealist paradigm has to do is account for matter, and we can account for matter. See, if materialists say that mind is primary, they have the task of explaining, if materialists say that matter is primary, they have the task of explaining how mind can be. We, saying that mind is primary, even though we can show how this is the case rationally and sufficiently, we aren't just dogmatically claiming it, we can show rationally how this is the case. But we have the task of showing how matter can be. This we can absolutely do. I've mentioned it before. Via Fourier transform, we can show how frequency functions by introducing phase relationships can give rise from a simple delta function into introducing extension, dimensionality into space-time functions. So we can account for matter. So our paradigm of a rationalist, idealist, mathematical monism, which is a dual aspect monism, can account for mind and matter. Science cannot do this. They cannot explain consciousness, mind, or subjectivity, or sentience, or any of these aspects because they are on faulty premises. Similarly, they cannot provide answers to the apparent mysteries of quantum mechanics, such as superposition, and they introduce all these absurdities to try and get away with it, such as particles existing everywhere at once, or the multiverse, all these crazy, absurd, fallacious ideas, because, again, mind is outside of their paradigm. As soon as you introduce mind, all the mysteries of quantum mechanics melt away. You don't have particles that have to be everywhere at once. You don't have to have particles that exist in an infinite number of universe. They're simple particles that are acting out their inner mathematical trajectories based on their inner mentality. Not that they're subjectivities, but that they are thought complexes that are still controlled by mental processes, not their own personal subjective mental processes. That would be some weird form of panpsychism, but by just the mental properties that would govern thought in general. So, I hope that I have, made it very, very clear how the monumental absurdity of scientific materialism. It's just to the point where I can't even read these crazy claims. It's just a joke. If the conscious mind is nothing more than the brain, then although we know the conscious mind is nothing more than the brain, it's simply beyond how we can know that it's nothing more than the brain. How do we know that? Well, we don't actually. All that we know, it's just, we know it, but we don't know it. So how can we know it? We don't know, but we do. I hope that I have at least elucidated the immense absurdities that come with dogmatically claiming that reality is material. And the fact that it cannot be explained is not some controversial idea. It's established almost consensus that scientific materialism cannot explain these things. They can't. It's known. That's not controversial. It can't. It's unknown how it can be. And that the founders of quantum mechanics said that reality is not material, that it's ultimately mind or mathematics, depending on or mathematical mind, whether it's Planck or Schrödinger or Heisenberg. And that once you introduce mind into the equation in an idealist mathematical rationalist system, all the mysteries melt away, and you don't have to claim all these absurd positions. So if you want to know more about this, check out my other videos, check out my books, check out my works, all these different things to get a better understanding. But yeah, quantum mechanics, consciousness, not such a hard problem after all. It's actually quite a elegant and beautiful thing that both rest on the commonality of mind. Science can't explain this because they try to deny mind, so of course they won't be able to explain it. It's just, this is like logic 101. I mean, come on, guys. Please, 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 please. So, hey, let's stop living in the intellectual dark ages, and hey, make your choice. What do you want to go with, right? Do you want to go with like religious faith? Do you want to go with dogmatic, materialist, empirical scientism? Or do you want to go with reason? I mean, it's up to you. You can choose what you want, or you can just not believe anything. But that in itself is a choice. I mean, at the end of the day, you choose what you want to choose. I'm laying out reasons to you, and make a choice. We as Hyperians are those that choose reason. So step with us into the future. Get out of the dark ages. Yeah, if you want, you don't have to, but it's here for you. Examine it with logic and reason. Make your own decision. And we'll be here building a new world and creating a new future. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports on Patreon, especially Cassidy, Alana, Renaissance Fairy, Michael, and Alan. thank all you guys. You're awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. If you enjoy my work and hey, if you've gained something from my videos, if you felt like you've learned something, consider supporting on Patreon, because that's how I'm able to do this. So if you've learned something, consider supporting. You'll get access to our weekly secret live streams, our hidden Discord server, the Citadel. We're having a secret live stream right after this. A lot of my hidden lecture notes, more things as well. Any tier on Patreon gets access to those things. And lowest tier is $5. That's it. And tier 2 or higher on YouTube gets access to all those things as well. It's the best way to support my work with all the censorship and deplatforming on Facebook, and it means a lot to me. So thank you very much.